everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers. I'm your host, Harriette Cole. And remember last week we had a very special guest, Huda Brown. She's a big-time scuba diver, been on 7 continents. Well, guess what? She is not the only Black woman scuba diver who's been doing her thing in those waters. Maybe not 7 continents, we're going to find out. But our guest today is Tara Roberts, and she has been here with us before. So she's come back. She is what we would call the epitome of the popular saying, do it scared. We're going to talk about what it means to go after your dreams, even when you don't have all the answers up front. Isn't that true for most of us? So if you're at a turning point in your life, I promise this conversation is for you, and you don't have to be a scuba diver. Joining us today is Tara Roberts. She's an award-winning storyteller, author, and National Geographic Explorer in Residence. Tara Roberts is a unique world traveler and historian. She has spent the last 6 years of her life using scuba diving as a means to explore the history of the transatlantic slave trade that still rests on the ocean floor. Earlier in her career, this is when I met Tara, she was an editor for major publications like Essence, where we met, Cosmo Girl, Ebony, and Heart and Soul. She has always helped people tell their stories, but she still felt a need to do something more. When she learned of an organization called Diving with a Purpose that searched for and documented slave shipwrecks, she decided to quit her job, hear this, and surround herself with people who look like her and stories of Black history. Who would have thought being a Black scuba diver could help shed light on untold portions of Black history or land you on the cover of National Geographic magazine? Yes, she is a cover girl. Tara Roberts' story is one of perseverance and exploration. She chose purpose over security, and her journey has helped bring forth an award-winning podcast, Into the Depths, and a courageous book, Written in the Waters, a memoir of history, home, and belonging. So she's here today to tell us more about how she put aside fear and chose to honor history. Please join me in welcoming Tara Roberts. Tara.
Hi, Harriette.
Can you tell that I'm proud of you?
Yes. I'm like, that was the best intro ever.
And we just last week talked to Huda Brown.
Amazing.
Isn't that
that's
something?
Such a great story. Yeah, like that's amazing.
I mean, so just for just a moment, the fact that there is another Black woman, this woman who changed her life, that was at a pivot point, and she first did all 7 continents, and then did it again so that Guinness could give her a world record. I mean, come on, this is amazing.
Well, and what's specifically amazing about that is that she was diving in cold water. Like that's a whole other thing.
Have you ever done that?
I mean, a little bit, but not to the extent that she has.
I mean, yeah, you go to all 7 continents. It's a way cold water.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, the fearlessness that I have witnessed in just talking to her, and I remember talking to you before, so we're going to dive into your story. Fearlessness is a very important quality to have if you want to have a great life. Can you talk about fearlessness in your life and how do you remember perhaps when you first felt fearless?
You know, I don't know that I would use that word.
Okay.
And I love that word. It's such a bold word. And I can't say that in those moments I was feeling bold in that way. The word that feels comfortable for me is curiosity, and sort of being unafraid to follow my curiosity. And that feels easier, you know, like to be fearless. I don't know, I got a lot of fears. But my curiosity, like leading with that sort of one step at a time, because I didn't know where any of this stuff was going to lead, but I just felt curious, and I felt strong enough to follow that curiosity.
I love the idea of curiosity because it pushes you. It pushes you beyond what you know, which is, I agree with you. I mean, it's another side of fearlessness. It's maybe a more joyful side of fearlessness too, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but it is a push, and maybe it's a push and a pull. You know,
Yes.
what's there,
Yes.
what's over there.
Yes. And you're making me think of I'm gonna so misquote her, but there's something that Iyanla Van Zant said in one of her books. I think it was like In the Meantime. And she says something like, Lord, make me so uncomfortable that I have to move. So it's curiosity and it's discomfort
Yes.
that can sometimes push you forward.
You know, for me, I remember when it was time for me to leave Essence, where we both worked, it was friction.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that friction can be your friend because it's almost like an alarm clock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if things are going really well, why would you change?
Yes.
You need something to not be good, something to agitate you, something to say,
Yeah.
and for me, it was friction. There were just things that were happening that didn't feel good anymore.
Yeah.
My job was still a great job,
Mm-hmm.
but it was time to change.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who come on Dream Leapers have been at a transition point, made the transition, and then they leaped into their greatness, into something amazing that didn't necessarily know that thing was over there. And without a doubt, that was you. I mean, you had a very successful career at top magazines, a number of top magazines, as an editor primarily. And that, by the way, is an amazing job. I mean, to be able to have the responsibility and trust to help to massage people's words so that they fit whatever the focuses of the publication, the space, all those different things. That's a gift. That's an art.
Yeah.
And that wasn't enough for you.
No. I had taken a bit of a detour from my magazine work, and I had stepped into the nonprofit world.
Right.
So the 6 years before this change happened, I had this idea to start my own my own nonprofit. I wanted to tell stories about young women change makers, and I ended up traveling around the world trying to interview them. And I discovered, maybe I didn't need to write stories about them. Maybe they needed an organization that could support them. So I was doing this organization, which I also felt called to do. But after 6 years, running a nonprofit it's brutal. Like, it's hard work. And it's not necessarily my true work. Like, I felt called to do that thing. But 6 years later, I woke up and I had on the administrative hat. I had on the fundraising hat. I had on the partnership development hat. I had on all of these hats that had nothing to do with words and with writing. And so I was starting to feel off balance and off purpose. That was the first thing that was happening. Like, my work just wasn't feeling like it was my true work. And then the second thing that happened, this was the year 2016. And if you can remember, 2016 was a big year. There's a lot of stuff happening in 2016.
Look it up, y'all.
That was a year when I think the national consciousness around race just seemed so full of fractures. And my work had been primarily around women's empowerment, even though, of course, I'm a Black woman. So there's some element of race around that, but it really was women's empowerment. And
just, it's not fair for me to just say, look it up, y'all. Hillary Clinton was running for president, and to many people's surprise, Hillary Clinton did not win. And there was a shock wave that went through the international system, I think. And you write about this in your book. And for people who were working in women's space, it certainly turned everything upside down, let's say.
It's a light way to say that. Yes, everything upside down. But so here you have like all of these conversations around race. And I wanted to do something to help heal that space, but I didn't know what to do. So I just moved to Washington, D.C. I started this new job still in the nonprofit world because that was sort of where my life was leading. And it was a good job. I was a director level person. I was in the communications world, but communications, storytelling, they're two different worlds, which I didn't realize until I started doing that work. And I was like, that's very different. It's adjacent, but it's different. So there I was in 2016, feeling like I wasn't doing my right work, wanting to do something that made a difference in the world, but not knowing what to do. So it was all of those pieces that were swirling for me in that moment.
And so this is a time of absolute uncertainty, knowing that where you were wasn't the right place. And now you are a grown woman. You know, you're not in your 20s going, oh, I could try this or I could try that. And I know that has a certain feel to it. You feel like you're supposed to be where you're supposed to be, right? Yeah. And how do you decide to go scuba diving? Like, how'd that happen? By
accident. It definitely wasn't something I was looking for. In early 2017, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, it opened in 2016. And I got a ticket to go there in 2017. And it was that museum that completely turned my life upside down. It was there that I saw a picture of a group of primarily Black women in wetsuits on a boat. And Harriette, in all the storytelling that we have done, there's a bunch of stories that have come through Essence Magazine. And maybe that has been shown there before, but not in my tenure. Right. I had never seen a picture of Black women in wetsuits on a boat before. Like, I didn't know that we were in that space at all. And it tugged something inside of me. It made me remember my dreams as a child. And I was one of those super nerdy kids who loved to read, and specifically who loved to read fantasy books and sci-fi books and all the characters that were out there trying to save the kingdom, you know, like they'd have their swords and their magic and they'd be out there trying to change the world. I loved those stories, and I wanted to be one of those characters. Like, I always knew that I wanted to be a storyteller, but my deepest dream was to really be an adventurous storyteller who was out in the world, you know, with my backpack, telling stories, connecting with people, sleeping on the ground. Like, that's helping to truly make a difference.
That's never been my dream, Tara. Everybody has a different dream. That is so funny. But let me just tell folks, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. Proof that it's everybody's dream, because Tara's talking about a dream that I don't understand. But I love it. And we're talking to Tara Roberts, who changed her whole life. And scuba diving is how it started. Seeing those scuba divers at the museum. I love that. But Tara, seriously, because this is sort of breaking stereotypes. It is not a common thought. Like you said, you saw these Black women in scuba gear. It is not a common thought to think that some Black women are going to be putting on scuba gear and diving into the depths of the ocean. Just like when I was talking to Huda Brown, unfortunately, a lot of Black people don't even know how to swim.
Yeah.
And so you are taking this thing to a far level. You talk about curiosity. This is the ultimate of curiosity. So you go from being fascinated by them and then researching them to, okay, I'm going to do this. Now, was that prompted by, you tell the story of a wedding that you were invited to in India. Did those two ideas coincide? How did it end up that you actually started scuba diving?
Well, so I see the picture, and then I do, as you said, the research. I'm like, well, who are these women? What are they doing? And I find out that they're part of this group called Diving with a Purpose, and that their mission is to search for and help document slave shipwrecks around the world. And I remember standing in the museum and being like, what? Like, what? What? They're doing what? I mean, I was just fascinated by this work. And I know I stayed in the museum for like an hour just at that exhibit trying to research and find out more about who they were. I think the universe works in weird ways. If I hadn't, if I hadn't have moved to DC, if I hadn't taken this job and moved to DC, one, I probably wouldn't have gone to the museum because I wasn't into museums, quite frankly. That wasn't my thing. But because I lived in DC and the National Museum of African American History and Culture was such a big deal, I felt like I had to go. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Then, even though I know it's time for me to leave the nonprofit world, I'm working for a nonprofit that gives out grants to individuals that are doing amazing things. So my first thought was not, oh my God, let me join them and be a scuba diver. My first thought was, how can I support them? Like, this feels like it's big, important work. I want to help. So I reached out to ask them permission for me to nominate them for a grant from my organization. And I don't know, if I hadn't been working for that organization, would I have reached out? I don't know. But here I felt like, oh, I can be of help to them. So I reached out. I spoke to the owner, who's this incredible, or founder, who's an incredible gentleman who was 72 years young at the time. He's funny. He's from New York. He and I became friends because we had a multitude of conversations to see if we could get him a grant from the organization. It turned out the organization wasn't a fit for that. But this gentleman and I, his name was Ken Stewart, we became friends. And Ken said to me at the end of our last call, he said, he likes to call me by my full name. And he said, Tara Roberts, do you know that you live in the epicenter of Black scuba diving? And I was like, what? I was like, I live in DC. And he was like, that's what I'm talking about. All the bad cats live in DC and work there. And so he extended the invitation. And I think I needed someone to invite me in, because I don't know that I felt, I didn't know anything about scuba diving. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. We don't we don't deal with the ocean in Atlanta. So that wasn't my world. I was a swimmer. I do like pools. I like the water, but I didn't know anything about the ocean. So Ken says to me, if you are interested, he was like, I will get you in a scuba diving class. And that was all I needed. And I was not afraid around that. I was like, yes, get me in the scuba diving class. So he got me in the class. It was a group called the Underwater Adventure Seekers. Harriette, they are the oldest Black diving club in the United States. And they started in the 1950s. The 1950s. Wow. Been around for over 60 years diving. So awesome. Again, if I hadn't have taken that job, I hadn't have ended up in DC, all of these things wouldn't have come together. So I think the universe was also making a way for me here. So when I got into the class, and the class, like, they take scuba diving very seriously. It's a 3-month long class where you're in the pool and in the classroom twice a week like it's serious for 3 months. That's when I got to know more of the divers. And many of the divers in that club were a part of Diving with a Purpose. So they were instructors for Diving with a Purpose. And as I got to know them, got to learn more and more about this work, about the ships, about the missions, I was like, oh my God, somebody needs to tell this story. Like, people should know about what these people are doing. And I was like, oh my, wait, I'm a journalist who's been looking for a story. Oh, maybe that should be me.
That is, so but I love that. You know, I think it's my mother. I think everything is my mother. That she taught me so many great things, but among them, you know, every talent, every skill that you develop, you can use for greater purpose. And so you should always cultivate whatever those skills are. And in this case, all of that journalistic knowledge that you had came knocking at the door saying, okay, here I am. I got an idea and I can execute it. I don't have to find somebody else to do it. Because sometimes when we collab, we need to collaborate because we don't have the skill. In this case, you could put that hat on in a blink.
Yeah.
And so what did you do? Because you had to then, I mean, you have this journalist, here's an idea. And look, Dream Leapers is all about ideas. But also, you know, as people are listening, like, okay, well, how do you go from this idea that's already kind of far out and then turn it into something concrete? Because you did. So what was that process?
Yeah. Well, first, when I realized, I could help tell their story, I went to them and I asked them permission. And I said, can I help tell your story? And so their board agreed to let me do that. And then when I found out that they were doing missions all over the world, they were working in South Africa, Mozambique, Senegal, Costa Rica, St. Croix, around the US, I just realized I didn't want to do this part-time. I didn't want to do this on the side. I wanted to go all in. And I realized to do that, I couldn't keep working a job. I mean, I wanted to dive with them. I wanted to travel around, to hear the stories, to really do that thing that I'd always dreamed of. So I took a leap of faith and decided to quit my job so that I could do this. And I thought, surely there will be fellowships and grants and other kinds of things that can support me, because I was not independently wealthy enough to just do that on my own. But yeah, so I quit my job.
And so did you look for those? Did you secure these fellowships and other things before you quit your job? Or it was just on faith? I believe it's going to work out, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I applied for one thing that I thought I would get before I left my job, but I didn't get it. But I was like, this is in motion and I am not turning back. So we're just going to have to trust that it will work out some sort of way. And so I quit my job in February of 2018. The grant that I thought I was going to get, I heard from them in January, and I was like, I heard from them, and the times are all confused in my head, but I heard from them before. And it took until September of that year for me to secure funding, but I had already left. I had left the United States. I'd gone to, this is when I went to I had already planned to go to a friend's wedding in India. And I was like, you know what?
Your story comes in. Okay.
I was like, well, it's, not so expensive to live in Southeast Asia. I was like, I'm going to stay in Southeast Asia for 2 months so I can get my dives in, because you have to develop a level of proficiency with your diving before you can participate in Diving with a Purpose. And the class for the training, the first training for Diving with a Purpose was that June. So I was like, all right, I'll take March, April for sure. If I need May, I can take May. And I'll stay in Southeast Asia and I'll get my dives in. And I'll also apply for some grants and we'll see what I get. But
And by
by
the way, Tara, so connecting the dots, you had been working with this not-for-profit for 6 years. You had done some fundraising. You knew about applying for grants, right? It wasn't a completely
yes,
foreign idea.
yes,
Again,
exactly.
I
When
just
I
want to
was,
close the loop for people to have a sense of you were building skills all along the way.
Mhm.
And then, so it's not like, oh, I have to get a grant, but I have no idea how to even look for a grant. You did know how to look for a grant, right?
yeah, yeah. And I should probably be more specific and say I knew how to do fellowships. I wasn't the best grant writer, but I knew
Okay.
how to write it for a fellowship, which is what paid for most of the finances for my nonprofit. And then I worked for this other nonprofit where maybe I did have a little bit of knowledge about grant writing. So maybe you're right there. Let's not discount that. Okay, I'll accept that one.
Well, okay, so therein is another thing. So I love pulling out these things because we don't always realize what we are doing as we are building our lives. But I think it's super important for people to hear. Often the building blocks are things that we learn somewhere else. And we may have discounted. I always tell people, especially if you don't like something that you have to do at work, become expert at it and then put it in your toolkit. It's a tool in your toolkit, and you never know when you're going to need that tool. If you just reject it, one day you might be sad that you didn't figure out how to do it. And you're showing us all these different things that you learned ended up being skills that helped you to be able to support this dream that was building within you.
Yeah. Ooh, that was well said. I don't know that I made all those connections, Harriet. Thank you.
Well, that's what I'm here for. and so then how do you get to the point where you are working with National Geographic?
So that was one of the places that I applied for. But listen to this, like how the universe works. And I don't know that I haven't told this story so much. When I was a kid, I used to read Nat Geo. Loved it. You talk about adventurous storytellers out, the photographers out in the world, hanging with all kinds of cultures, telling their stories. I loved the magazine growing up. But then at some point, it's the same thing that I realized with the fantasy books that I loved. I realized at some point that the characters in those books, the photographers, the writers in Nat Geo, like none of them ever looked like me. So again, I began to think, this isn't for me. And so I stopped reading Nat Geo as I got older. This is interesting, again, the way the world works. In 2018, Nat Geo came out with its race issue. I don't know if you saw this issue. It was Nat Geo's moment to reckon with its past. So they got a number of Black writers and photographers and contributors to think through the issue. They put the issue together, and it was Nat Geo's moment to really say, we have contributed to the way that the world others certain cultures. So it was its moment of reckoning.
It took responsibility.
It took responsibility. They had their very first female editor-in-chief. So they were moving in this space, and that editor-in-chief, her name is Susan Goldberg, took on the race issue. So that issue came out in 2018, around the time that all of this was happening for me. So it put Nat Geo back on my radar, and I was so impressed by that issue that it made me go and just be like, well, what else are they doing? This is amazing. So I go.
So let me just to pause for a moment for some context, because I'm not aware of that. I'm going to go and look that issue up. What I am aware of, and I'm sure you were too, and many people, Nat Geo was the primary magazine to represent African people as women as bare-breasted, men with staffs, barely clad in the bush. And that is what people thought Africa was. Yeah. And I remember when I first started at Essence, which was in 1984, in 85, that very next year, 6 months after I started, and I was in the contemporary living department, we went to the Ivory Coast. And I knew we weren't going to see that because we had done our research, but that was the image that I thought was Africa. And we went and saw women in business and women and men in government and people in fabulous homes and, really living their best lives in both Western and African ways, but not African in the ways that Nat Geo had shown it.
Yeah.
Like it was really that documentation that they had shown for a very long time made Africa look, pagan and, just stereotypical. So you're saying now this woman editor-in-chief comes in and says, no, we're going to tell the truth. And let me remind folks, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We're talking to Tara Roberts, and right now we are talking kind of cold water in the face regarding history and Nat Geo owning up to who they had been and where they were headed. So tell us more, Tara.
To me, it was such a beautiful issue. Even Susan's letter from the editor was just like, this is what we've done. And it's African cultures, it's indigenous cultures, it's women, Nat Geo was really one of the shapers of the narratives and the understanding that people from the US, people from the quote unquote Western world had of everyone else. So they took responsibility for that. And it impressed me so much that it made me go and look and see, well, what are they doing? Who else are they? And that's when I discovered that they gave out grants. And I was like, what? And it turned out that this year in 2018, they had a focus on the ocean, and they also have a tract that's around human history and culture. So I was like, I've never done this sort of storytelling before, but let me put my hat in the ring and see what happens. And so I applied in the spring, and I sweated all throughout the rest of the spring and the summer. I'm just like, I don't know what's going to happen. And then in September, the Diving with a Purpose team called me up and they were like, all right, we are headed to Mozambique on a mission in December. If you can come, we'd love to have you. And I was like, I've got to go. I got to be on this mission. And that's when I opened up my inbox mid-September, and there is a congratulations letter from Nat Geo. So they gave me my very first grant, which wasn't super huge, but it was enough to let me travel. And I can travel real cheap. So I'm like, I don't need a lot, but I just needed something that got me in motion and that got me on the ground. So I started out writing blog entries about my journey. And I had no sense that this was going to go anywhere, except I just felt the story is important. It intrigues me to see Black folks so different. It upends who we think Black people can be in the world. Right. And then this history felt really important. And I kept thinking, if we knew more of who we are and where we came from, does it change how we see ourselves? So that felt just important to put this out there. So I started out writing these blog entries. And the more that I did that, the more I was like, writing 200-word pieces about the transatlantic slave trade and all of this history, it's not enough. This is a bigger story. So I went back to Nat Geo. Again, they've got a lot of explorers. I don't know that they're going to support the work anymore, but it turns out they do. And they turned me into a storytelling fellow, and they give me more funding because I told them that I could hear this story. I thought that it was a podcast. I thought it was an audio story. And at the time they had a podcast team, and the podcast team was like, yes, we want to tell this story. So they gave me more funding to produce Into the Depths, which was this 6-episode limited series narrative podcast that tells the stories of the divers. You could hear them tells the stories of some of the ships and the wrecking events, and it tells a little bit of my journey. So that was great. And we did a film, we did more stories in the magazine. It turned into a cover story in the magazine, more and more
with
things.
You on the cover.
With me on the cover. And then I become, just imagine this person who never saw herself in all of these publications that she loved. And then I become the first Black female explorer to ever be featured on the cover of Nat Geo magazine.
That's a drop the mic moment, okay?
And just because I followed this curiosity, saw this picture in the museum. So yeah, that led to even more storytelling. And then the latest bit of storytelling is the book, my memoir, which came out this year, Written in the Waters. And it tells deeper parts of all of those stories and deeper parts about my transformation around this work. This work has completely shifted me in so many ways. So the book kind of goes into detail about that.
Yeah, and it's very well written, which is no surprise, but for people,
it means a lot when it comes from my fellow editors. Like, thank you.
Well, I read a lot, and I appreciate when the storytelling is strong storytelling, because you can really, you take us into the experiences so that we are experiencing it with you, and the experiences are sometimes pretty fantastic. So it's like, wow, okay, I'm going there with her. Got it. I when I listen to you and I read your work, you say curiosity. Another thing that comes up is courage. I feel like you've had a lot of courage and faith in yourself to believe it's okay. I my heart is telling me I have to do this, and I have to do it. And it never seemed, at least in what I've read and how you've talked about it, hasn't seemed reckless. It seemed purposeful.
Yeah.
Talk about that, please.
Yeah, I would say the feeling that I had not doing this work or not following this path was so, I mean, I don't mean to overspeak it, but it felt bad. Do you know, when I thought about continuing to work in a space that didn't feel like it was my passion, when I felt like I really wanted to make a difference in the world in this way, and I couldn't. Like, I felt depressed. I felt down. I didn't feel good. But whenever I thought about these divers, whenever I thought about heading to Mozambique and what sort of story can I tell there, I felt such a lightness inside of me, such a sense of joy. So again, I don't even know that it was really courage. It was me following the light and the joy. That's all I was like, I don't want to feel the other way. Thinking about getting up in the morning, going into an office where I also wasn't that good at the work I was doing. I was like, oh man, I think I'm making mistakes. Like, I don't want to be a manager. I got to manage people. Like, it wasn't my dream. Yeah. Like, I just felt tired. I felt really tired. And the other way, I felt light. So just wanted to follow that lightness.
As you share your story with others, what has the reaction been?
It's been a lot of love. A lot of people tell me that they're proud of me. People who we haven't even met yet. And they're just like, we're so proud that you're out there doing this thing, and that you're repping for us, and that you are helping to do the work to bring these stories back into memory. So that feels amazing. And then I think maybe, like, it feels weird for me to say this, but I think maybe a couple people are sort of inspired to get into the water. Like folks
Good.
are like, you know what? I want to swim or I want to get in the water. How could I be involved? Which is fantastic. So I think,
Sure.
people tell me that they're inspired
That's
by the
beautiful.
story.
And talk a little bit about the diving with a purpose, where you're diving at sites where slave ships are in the ocean, and just give us a bit about the context of how, about those ships getting there, and because there's some really haunting history around that.
Yeah. Well, first, the work that Diving with a Purpose does is called underwater archaeology mapping. So we are down there on the ocean floor with clipboards and measuring tape and pencils, and we're actually drawing the wreckage that is on the ocean floor. So that's an incredible bit of work. But here's a little bit of context about the ships and the scope of this work. There were approximately 12,000 ships that brought about 12.5 million Africans to the Americas. So you got 12,000 ships. And historians estimate that somewhere around 1,000 of those ships wrecked. But to date, less than 20 have been found and properly documented. So there is a whole chapters of history that's just missing. So what Diving with a Purpose does, and it does this in partnership with other organizations and groups, it is trying to help document that history so that we can expand the historical record. There's not a lot that is written about those journeys, and definitely not a lot that's written from, say, an Afrocentric point of view. So this is an opportunity to help bring some of those stories back into memory. And one of the things that I have been really moved to do is to tell stories of the ancestors. Like there's a way that I think it's easy to think about the people who were in those cargo holds as victims. You can think of them as statistics, but even I was not thinking about them as individuals, as people, with histories and lives and loves and, experiences. I was not thinking of them in that way. But through this work, that has been one thing that I've tried to do more of. And of course, we'll never know the stories of all the people who died. And it's a lot. This is another stat that I didn't know until I started this work. But approximately 1.8 million Africans died just in the crossing from Africa to the Americas. We're not talking about the number of people who died once they arrived and were enslaved. Just in the crossings, 1.8 million people. There's this myth that the Atlantic Ocean is, or people say that it's one of the most turbulent oceans on the planet. And some people say that's because of all the lost souls who've never been acknowledged or honored. So part of this work is about acknowledging that loss, honoring the ancestors, helping to put them to rest. And that just feels like such important work for our own healing, for the world's healing. So I feel very proud and honored to be a part of this conversation and this work.
That's beautiful. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We're going into the soul, into the spirit, as Susan Taylor would say, talking with Tara Roberts, who has spent a number of years exploring in the ocean and telling us right now about this wonderful project that is documenting as many of the slave ships that were wrecked as they can in partnership with other organizations. And it just sounds like such incredible work. We just have a few minutes left, Tara. I want to talk about what's next, because when I talked to you last, when you were doing Into the Depths, when this whole pivot began, there wasn't really a book in mind. I think you were trusting yourself to see where things would lead, but really having the faith that it was going to lead to the right place. And so now you're at another pivot point. When you look into your future, what do you see?
It's a great question. So National Geographic just named me an explorer in residence, which means that they brought me in-house. And they brought me in-house because we are working together to birth a part 2 of this work. And I actually can't talk about it fully yet. But I think it's going to be very exciting for when people hear it. It's a really unique way, I think, of honoring the ancestors and acknowledging this past. So we are working together on this project, which if it comes together as we want it to.
When it comes together as you want it to.
When it
girl.
Thank you. It's right now it's imagined as a 5-year project. So from now until 2030, I will be in this space. And really centering inside of memorialization and honoring and connecting.
So that sounds amazing. And just for folks who are tuned in, there's so many things of how this journey has unfolded that I want people to pay attention to. Because one thing, Tara, and I know you probably have this experience now, when you're on a stage, people say, "Oh, she can do it, but that doesn't mean I can do it." You know, she's on the stage. This is the danger of when you reach some level of awareness. It's not so much celebrity, but just people know who you are, and therefore they think you're different. And to me, the biggest difference is perhaps you just kept at it. You know, you meaning you, me, whoever it might be. And what I would like for you to break down just in these couple of minutes that we have left is, you know, your synopsis of what you have brought to this journey, to find your journey, because you said you didn't really know and you were kind of figuring it out. But what would you say, what were the key steps that have gotten you to this space?
Well, as we discussed a bit earlier, I think following my curiosity was important. I'm a body-centered person. I think when your body feels tired and heavy and your heart hurts, that's your soul talking to you. So paying attention to that, paying attention to what brings you light, joyfulness, and happiness. So I think there's a bit of that. And I think there is faith. I do think that I have a lot of faith in the universe. That's the word that I use. Other people use other words, but I got faith in the universe. And I also, and this is the thing that I really want people to take away from this book and from my journey, is that it's never too late. Never, ever too late.
Do
to
not
follow your curiosity, step into your passion. Never too late.
Well, thank you for sharing this next leg of your journey with us. I can't wait to hear exactly what that project is. So when you're ready to tell it, please come back and tell us about it.
I will.
Congratulations on your book. It's beautifully written. You should feel really proud. And I'm proud of you too.
Thank you, Harriette. Thank you always.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in. Wasn't it great to listen to Tara Roberts? Check out her new book. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.